when two twin souls reach the Sophia phase, when both fully integrate their dignity as identity and not as reaction, something extraordinary always happens. Their way of loving transforms radically, and with it, their perception of each other. This video doesn't exist to comfort you or inflate your self-esteem. It exists to show you the exact psychological mechanism that activates when he and she simultaneously discover they can no longer have each other at any price. And when this happens, nothing feels the same for either of them anymore. Here you'll hear the 6 true mental stages both souls go through when dignity prevails, from initial confusion to inner breakthrough, all the way to the point where the dynamic reverses forever in a transformation no one forgets. If you leave before the end, you'll miss the most dangerous and decisive part, the one that separates couples who give in again from couples who become legendary. This isn't just any content, it's the message you need to hear in full if you want to understand the true meaning of transformative love. Jung warned that no one confronts another human being without first confronting their own shadow. And that's exactly what happens here when two conscious people meet. Your dignity forces you to see what you had avoided. If any of this is already resonating with you, subscribe and write "I hear you" in the comments. That way YouTube understands this reflection deserves to continue. Because if you listen to it at the right moment, it doesn't just change your mood, it changes the inner structure from which you love and from which you allow yourself to be loved. First step, the sacred moment when he realizes she is no longer negotiable. Listen with deep attention, because here a very common fantasy in ordinary relationships breaks. A man doesn't realize he's losing a woman when she leaves physically. He realizes it when he can no longer move her internally. It's not a harsh phrase, not a sharply announced boundary, not a dramatic emotional scene. It's a silent shift in inner position, and when it happens, he perceives it long before he can put it into confused words. I want to make this concrete with a real case that represents millions of stories. Chrisbel and Marco came to counseling together with a story that repeats more often than you'd imagine. She was affectionate, deep, committed. She didn't beg, didn't chase, didn't make emotional scenes. From the outside, anyone would have said she has dignity, but internally, she was constantly negotiating in silence, justifying absences, waiting too long, tolerating small inconsistencies so as not to be inconvenient, until something changed, not out in the world, but within her psychic structures. And that movement activated the first true rupture in his mind. For years, Chrisbel confused patience with genuine mature love. She thought understanding meant yielding, that adapting meant taking care deeply and selflessly, and without realizing it. She taught her inner system, and Marco's, that her space could stretch without ever breaking. Every long, silent wait, every lukewarm response, every accumulated "it doesn't matter" formed a subtle, silent dynamic. There was no conscious malice, but there was also no authentic growth, because when you adapt too much, the other never feels the urgency to get themselves in inner order. And this is felt even if it's never said explicitly. The rupture didn't arrive with the door slammed loudly or with desperate tears. It arrived the transformative day, when Chrisbel stopped over-explaining herself constantly. Something didn't sit right with her, and she stopped justifying it. Something irritated her, and she stopped swallowing it silently. She didn't leave dramatically, didn't threaten, didn't complain continuously. She simply stopped betraying herself in the small daily things. This gesture, as invisible as it was radical, reconfigures the entire relational system. Because when you return to yourself, your energy stops asking continuously, stops adapting the other so he won't leave, and this is felt like an immediate loss of guaranteed access. Here appears the first deep masculine mental reaction. It's not yet conscious fear, it's inner discomfort. He doesn't understand what exactly has changed. He only feels that something no longer reacts the same familiar way. Her silence weighs differently in his chest. Her boundaries don't sound defensive. Her presence no longer offers itself as readily available as before, and this forces him to observe, not to take care of her, but to reposition himself internally. Because when a woman stops being negotiable without announcing it verbally, the man finds himself facing a new destabilizing sensation. The dynamic he took for granted is no longer assured and automatic. Jung would say that at this point, the shadow activates. That part of the psyche that reacts when it loses emotional control, not absolute dominance, easy access. He doesn't think rationally, "I'll lose her." He thinks something deeper and more conscious. I no longer understand from which position to relate to her consciously. Before, when she left, he lost a woman physically. Now when she leaves, he loses a comfortable inner position, and this disrupts much more than temporary physical absence. Because love can eventually be replaced. Embodied dignity cannot. It's important you see this clearly now. This doesn't happen when you leave physically. It happens when you make 3 conscious inner movements. You stop staying where your body constantly tenses to maintain the relationship. You stop explaining yourself to someone who isn't willing to truly listen. You begin to make small decisions that are in alignment with yourself, even if the other visibly doesn't like them. Not to provoke openly, but to respect yourself deeply. When you do this, you don't become cold and hard. You become clear and conscious. And clarity is deeply intimidating to someone who is comfortable in your emotional ambiguity and constant flexibility. The man starts measuring consciously, observing times, precise words, subtle reactions, not because you're intentionally manipulating him, but because you stop manipulating yourself so he stays comfortable. Here, his deep unconscious fantasy breaks. She's always there. And when this certainty falls, his mind enters conscious alert. It's not yet conscious love, it's inner reordering, because no one appreciates what seems unconditional, but appreciates what has silent boundaries. This is the true beginning of authentic psychological respect. Many women believe dignity is harshness and coldness. No, dignity is inner coherence, maintained over time without oscillations. Crisbell didn't become distant and cold. She became whole and conscious. And this activated in Marco a dangerous conscious question. What place do I occupy now in her life and in her heart? You're no longer emotional reaction. You're conscious presence. You no longer chase. You choose deliberately. And this constant choice, without declared words, disarms every dynamic based on mutual convenience. Here, there's no conscious punishment. There's inner structure, and structure orders more than any romantic declaration of love. This step is silent but irreversible, because once your system learns it doesn't have to tense up to love fully, it can no longer easily go back. He feels it even if he doesn't explicitly name it. He knows something has fundamentally changed, that he can no longer count on your constant emotional flexibility, and this forces him to define himself, grow consciously or withdraw emotionally. Both options are born from the same point, your return to yourself consciously, not from an external threat, but from an inner integrity that is no longer negotiable. I want you to hold this phrase as deep anchoring because it changes the entire relational chessboard. I don't have to leave to stop being internally negotiable. I have to return to myself consciously. When you fully integrate this, the bond stops holding itself together by conscious inertia, and the masculine mind, losing comfort, begins to compare consciously. Not you with the past, but with any other woman who doesn't embody this level of deep, authentic coherence. And there begins something even deeper and more transformative in the second step of the Sophia phase. Second step, why your dignity activates more respect than all the love you've given together over time. It hurts initially, but it liberates deeply. Love, when it has no inner structure, becomes landscape. It's there, it supports, but it doesn't truly order. What really reorganizes a man's mind is the inner form from which you love consciously. When you love without abandoning yourself completely, when you don't reduce yourself to constantly adapt, he can no longer read you from comfort consciously. And this silent, firm change weighs more than any emotional promise you made before. The deep common mistake is believing that giving more love generates more conscious commitment. No, it generates more unconscious habit. Dignity, instead, introduces a new deep variable, inner consequence, not direct punishment, not calculated coldness, authentic coherence. Jung explained that the psyche respects what has defined contours. When it has clear, firm internal boundaries, the other perceives there's something they cannot cross without transforming deeply. And this evokes respect even before desire, because now he doesn't possess you emotionally. He must position himself before you consciously. Here, a deep unconscious confrontation occurs. He begins making unconscious contrasts. He doesn't verbalize it openly, but he feels it viscerally. Your current presence against the past version that always adapted and yielded. Your calm against your old anxious waiting. And this confrontation generates inner tension, because before, your love was always guaranteed. Now your access isn't. And when access stops being secure and guaranteed, the masculine mind enters evaluation, not romantic, strategic. Do I elevate myself consciously or lose this place in our heart? This question marks a definitive before and after. Many women believe this is conscious manipulation. No, it truly isn't. Manipulating would mean changing to provoke a calculated reaction. Here, you're not changing for him. You're changing for deep coherence with yourself. And this is felt in a completely different way. Your energy no longer pushes, doesn't ask continuously, doesn't adapt anymore. It simply is, and this stable presence without effort disarms more than any passionate speech, because he can no longer lean on your emotional flexibility to stay the same. Now he must grow consciously or feel uncomfortable until he leaves. In counseling, this point appears in their confused phrases. I don't know what's happening to me. I perceive her differently deeply. Before it was simpler for me. Simple isn't love, it's access without consequences. And when this is lost, something new and conscious appears, real attention. Not always healthy initially, not always mature, but finally attention, because your dignity has forced his system to wake up. Not from fear of losing you physically, but from the sensation of losing an inner place that gave him security without effort. Here is where many doubt and step back. When he begins to approach differently, to measure things, to be more attentive, the temptation to give in again appears, and there everything is decided. Because if you use your dignity as strategy, it dilutes and empties. But if you maintain it as identity, it solidifies. Jung would say this is the moment when the bond stops being unconscious projection and becomes conscious choice. And not everyone is ready to choose from there. Your dignity doesn't guarantee you'll stay. It guarantees something more important, that you won't lose yourself. And paradoxically, that's what has the most transformative impact. because you no longer move from fear of losing him. You move from respect for your deep inner axis. And this emotional autonomy changes the balance. He's no longer the supreme evaluator. Now, it's he who must understand if he can rise to the level of coherence you embody without announcing it verbally. This respect isn't born from sacrifice, it's born from boundaries. Not from drama, but from maintained calm. When you don't react from the wound but from clarity, he can no longer play at the same level as before, and this makes him deeply uncomfortable, but also awakens him, because dignity doesn't seduce like attachment does, but it leaves a trace that isn't easily erased, not even when the relationship inevitably ends. You become the inner reference, not the romantic memory. I want you to see this without naively idealizing. Some men grow in the face of this, others withdraw. Both results are coherent. What changes is that you no longer negotiate your center to hold on to someone, and when your love is born from there, it stops being a constant offering, it becomes shared choice. This is the difference between being desired and being respected, and the masculine mind, even if it doesn't admit it, always knows when it's facing the second. In the next step, we'll enter an even more delicate and conscious zone. What happens when he begins to feel silent fear? Not of losing you, but of not being enough to truly, consciously keep you. There appear contradictory behaviors, approaches, and retreats, silent tests. And if you don't understand this point, you might confuse intensity with love. But if you do understand it, you'll remain firm while the dynamic completely reverses from within. Third step, when respect begins to transform into silent conscious fear. It's not the childish fear of losing you, it's the adult fear of never being enough. Here, the masculine mind enters deep contradiction. He wants to approach, but fears exposing himself emotionally. He seeks you and then withdraws. Not because he's playing games, but because his identity is consciously reorganizing itself. Your dignity forces him to look at himself without the cushion of your availability, and this activates an inner anxiety, even if outwardly he shows calm or distance. This fear doesn't express itself with clear words. It appears as ambiguity, lukewarm messages, intermittent, intense gestures. He tests if you're still there, but no longer from the same conscious place. And when he realizes you don't react like before, that you don't chase or complain, the unease grows, because now he can no longer regulate himself through your automatic emotional reaction. Jung would call this a confrontation with the true self, without protective masks. And not everyone knows how to bear that intense inner gaze. Many women misinterpret this moment. They confuse intensity with progress. They believe intermittent closeness is a sign of emerging love. It's not always truly that. Sometimes it's just a system trying to regain emotional control. Your task isn't to decipher it, but to remain firm in your dignity. If you don't move from fear, if you don't fill the voids he creates, he finds himself facing something new, his own inner void. And this encounter can transform him deeply or push him to flee unconsciously. The important thing is this: listen to it with deep calm. Your dignity doesn't accelerate processes, it reveals them. If he approaches from presence, you'll feel it viscerally. If he approaches from fear, you'll equally feel it. The difference lies in inner stability. Love born from fear needs constant proof. Love born from respect seeks connection. And you, by not abandoning your center, become the natural filter that distinguishes one from the other without saying a single word. At this point, the dynamic has already begun to completely reverse. Before, you were the one measuring times, words, gestures constantly. Now it's him. He observes if you're still available, if something loosens, if you go back to adapting. And when you don't, an uncomfortable but deeply revealing sensation appears. He no longer has you secured, not because you're leaving, but because you're no longer dependent. It's this emotional independence that reorganizes his perception of value more than anything. Jung affirmed that authentic desire is born when the other cannot be possessed, only found. Your dignity removes you from the place of emotional object and restores you to that of conscious subject. And this completely changes the gaze. You're no longer she who is always there. You're she who chooses to be there. This difference seems subtle, but it completely transforms the experience of the bond, because now he no longer relates to your dedication, but to your conscious presence. This is a delicate phase for you too, because if he shows fear or confusion, it can reawaken your old role, reassure, explain, constantly sustain. Here, it's decided whether your dignity is identity or strategy. If you give energy back to the bond, the system returns to the known. If you maintain yourself, something new installs itself, not from coldness, but from inner coherence. And this coherence begins to require from him a clearer, more conscious position. Some men at this point elevate themselves, become more present, more emotionally responsible. Others weaken, not because you did something wrong, but because the level has risen, and dignity doesn't negotiate at the lower altitude. You don't push, don't threaten, you simply no longer descend. And this redefines the bond without confrontation, because true respect isn't imposed, it's naturally embodied. And when it's embodied, it can no longer be ignored by anyone. I want you to observe something important in this phase. When he begins to change, it's not because you convinced him, it's because your integrity put him face to face with himself. And when he doesn't change, it's not a failure, it's information. Your dignity spares you years of confusion. It shows you who can meet you at the level where you are and who could only love you when you made yourself smaller. This clarity hurts at first, but liberates in the long term. In the next step, we'll enter the point of no return.
When he understands he can no longer return to the version of you that bent, a definitive inner decision appears, not always conscious, but deeply determining. And depending on how you maintain yourself at that point, this decision can transform him deeply or seal the ending with an elegance that wasn't possible before.
Fourth step, the moment when he understands there's no possible return. The version of you that waited, that adapted, that yielded just to maintain things, doesn't come back anymore. And this certainty doesn't arrive with a conversation. It arrives with an irreversible inner sensation. He can no longer provoke the same reaction in you, can no longer count on your emotional availability. Something is closed, not from resentment, but from deep coherence. And when this happens, his mind stops testing and begins to decide from a deeper place. Here appears a silent mourning. He doesn't cry your physical absence. He mourns the loss of a dynamic that gave him security without effort. And this hurts more than you imagine, because confronting a woman who doesn't retreat forces him to accept his own limits. Jung defined this point as the death of a projection. You no longer carry his voids, and when the projection falls, only two possible paths remain: mature consciously or withdraw emotionally. If he decides to stay, the way he looks at you changes, no longer from comfort, but from conscious respect. He begins to regulate himself, to take on emotional responsibility, to measure what he offers, not from fear of losing you, but because he understands he cannot maintain you from the same level. Your dignity has raised the standard without verbally requiring it, and this movement redefines the bond. You're no longer refuge, you're encounter, and not everyone knows how to love from there. If he decides to go, even the closure is different. There's no persistent drama, no eternal push and pull. There's a clear sensation of inner boundary. You don't chase explanations, don't try to convince, and this leaves a trace, because even if he leaves, he carries with him a reference impossible to erase, that of a woman who didn't negotiate her own access for love. This image returns later when other dynamics no longer suffice. This point is decisive for you, because here the deep doubt usually appears. Was I too rigid, perhaps? You are coherent, and coherence is never excess. Love that survives only if you make yourself smaller isn't love, it's dependency. Your dignity didn't destroy anything precious. It only revealed what couldn't sustain itself at your level. And even though letting go hurts, something in you begins to rest deeply. There's no more constant tension or silent self-abandonment. Jung would say that here your true individuation begins. You no longer define yourself by being chosen, but by choosing yourself consciously. And this identity transforms all your future bonds, because now you don't love from lack, you love from presence. You don't try to be enough, you already are. And this energy changes the way others approach, not from request, but from recognition. Your dignity becomes the natural filter that orders everything. This step marks the definitive before and after. It doesn't matter if he returns or not. You no longer return to the version that waited for crumbs. And this is the true gain, because now you know you don't need intensity to feel valuable, nor promises to remain firm. Your calm becomes home, and from there can only enter whoever knows how to inhabit it without trying to disturb it to feel superior. Many men remember this type of woman, not with romantic nostalgia, but with delayed respect, because she was the one who showed the limit they couldn't cross. And that limit, far from shutting them out, put them face to face with themselves. You didn't teach with discourse, you taught with embodiment. And that's what remains when everything else dissolves over time. I want you to breathe here, because this isn't a point of harshness, it's a point of deep calm. You no longer have to sustain the unsustainable. You no longer have to translate yourself to be loved. Your dignity hasn't isolated you. It has completely ordered you. And when you're ordered within, the exterior begins to respond differently, not always fast, not always simple, but always more authentic. In the next step, we'll close the circle of transformation. What happens when you integrate all this as identity, not as reaction to a specific story? How your way of loving and being chosen will be rewritten. There, where you no longer define yourself by who stays, but by what you'll never allow again. This is the point where love stops hurting and begins to feel authentic and true. Fifth step, when you integrate dignity as identity, not as response to a past wound. Here you no longer act from the past, you act from conscious presence. Your decisions don't seek an effect, they seek deep coherence, and this is noticed in everything. Your yes has weight, your no rests. There's no urgency to define something because you're already defined from within. This stability changes how others read you, because there are no longer emotional cracks through which to enter to negotiate your value. At this point, love stops being a continuous test. You no longer need signs to feel secure. Your body is aligned with your boundaries, your word with your actions. And this congruence, so simple and so rare, becomes magnetic, not from seduction, but from deep clarity. Whoever approaches perceives it, and whoever cannot sustain it withdraws without noise. Dignity doesn't argue, it naturally orders the field. Here, something subtle and transformative happens. You begin to notice you no longer hook onto vague promises or intensity without direction. Your system recognizes the difference between authentic presence and performance. This saves you time, energy, costly illusions.
Yeah.
You don't become demanding, you become precise. And emotional precision is a language understood only by those who are ready to connect without games. The rest falls away on its own without friction. Jung spoke of integration as the act of stopping, fragmenting yourself to please others. That's what you do here consciously. You no longer separate what you feel from what you allow. You don't negotiate your intuition to maintain a bond. And when someone tries to overstep a boundary, your body reacts before your words. There's no anger, there's an elegant withdrawal. And this, with withdrawal, was far from closing the heart, protects it deeply. This is the point where many say with wonder, I no longer attract the same type of people. Exactly, precisely so. Because you no longer transmit from lack. Your dignity changes the frequency you emit. You no longer call forth whoever needs to be held, but whoever knows how to hold themselves consciously. And this doesn't guarantee quantity, it guarantees deep quality. Less noise, more truth, less fear, more authentic choice. Your love life doesn't simplify because you love less, but because you love yourself better. Here, the memory of him loses force, not because he wasn't important, but because he no longer occupies the center of your identity. The center is you, and from there, the past orders itself without resentment. You're grateful for what you learned, and you move forward consciously. There are no open accounts, there are definitive inner closures. This is the true liberation you are seeking, not when the other returns or asks forgiveness, but when you no longer need him to be in deep peace. This change is noticed even in silence. You no longer explain your boundaries, don't justify your decisions. You simply act in coherence, and this coherence becomes your new normal. Whoever arrives late perceives it instantly. There's no reproach, there's natural distance. Dignity doesn't build walls. It establishes thresholds and only enters whoever knows how to cross them without ever invading. When you look back, you understand something important and radical. You didn't lose authentic love. You gained inner structure, and this structure is the foundation of every healthy bond. Without it, love overflows in wounds. With it, love contains itself and grows. Jung would say that here the bond stops being compensation and becomes a true encounter. Two emotionally adult people who choose each other, not who desperately need each other. This is the legacy of your dignity, not changing anyone, but shifting yourself to another place, leaving the role of constant option and inhabiting that of conscious choice. And from there, everything reorganizes your relationships, your energy, your daily decisions. You no longer chase, you attract conscious presence. You no longer fear losing, you trust your capacity to choose better. And now, at the closing of this cycle, remember this, because it contains everything that precedes it. Your dignity doesn't distance you from love. It brings you to the right one. It doesn't make you inaccessible, it makes you authentic. And when you're authentic, love stops being a struggle and becomes a home. From here, you don't go back because you no longer seek to be chosen, you choose yourself. If this resonates, hit like and subscribe to receive these reflections. Sixth step. When everything reconfigures from within, you no longer act from reaction, you act from deep identity. This is the point where dignity stops being a concept and becomes your natural way of being in the world. You don't ask yourself what to do so the other stays. You ask yourself if that bond honors what you are now. And this silent question guides every decision. There's no urgency, no fear. There's a firm calm that is no longer negotiable. Here, something deep and transformative happens. Your nervous system learns that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. You no longer confuse intensity with authentic connection, nor sacrifice with true commitment. Your body recognizes when something is healthy and when it isn't. And this inner intelligence spares infinite useless explanations. You don't have to close cycles with words. You close them with coherence, and that coherence is felt even in your silence, even when you say nothing. Many men don't forget a woman like this, not because she was perfect, but because she was consciously whole, because she didn't betray herself to be chosen, because she showed without speaking what someone who deeply respects themselves looks like. Jung said that what isn't integrated repeats itself, and you have broken the repetition, so you've become an inner reference point for those who've known you. Not everyone recognizes it immediately, but everyone remembers it. This is the point where love stops being a psychological game. There are no more tests, strategies, roles to constantly maintain. There's presence, there's reciprocal choice. And if there isn't, there's still peace, because your value no longer depends on being desired, but on being faithful to yourself. This inner faithfulness is the foundation of every bond worth living. Without it, everything is negotiated. With it, everything naturally orders itself. I want you to hear this with deep tenderness. Not everyone can love you from this level, and that's not a loss. It's a natural purification. Your dignity doesn't exclude anyone. It filters. It lets in whoever can sustain a relationship without depending on your self-sacrifice. And even if the path becomes more selective, it also becomes lighter. Less noise, less confusion, more authentic truth. When you integrate all this, you no longer look back with guilt, but with conscious understanding. You understand why you yielded, why you waited, why you adapted, and you also understand why you can no longer do it. Not because you're hard, but because you've grown. And growing means letting go of old versions of yourself. This too is true self-esteem, one that doesn't have to prove itself, only sustain itself. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the most courageous act of the human being, becoming what you truly are, even if this means losing bonds that existed only through dependency. You have consciously walked this path, and so you've changed
Yes.
the way you love, choose, and let yourself be chosen. You no longer
Right.
seek to complete yourself, you share from your fullness. This is love that doesn't consume itself. If this message arrived to you at the right moment, stay a moment, hit like and subscribe. Small gestures that make this space grow together with you, and tell me in the comments which part touched you most. Because when we share from truth, YouTube favors what we choose together. And this type of reflection only reaches those who are ready to deeply feel it. Don't forget this when you close the video. Your dignity isn't a barrier, it's a luminous beacon. It doesn't chase love away, it consciously orients it, and whoever from now on comes toward you will come, knowing they cannot take you for granted, but can find you through authentic choice. This is the difference between a bond that consumes and one that genuinely sustains. Today, you don't leave with techniques, but with a deeply embodied truth. You don't have to prove your value nor convince someone to stay. Your simple, aligned, and firm presence already says everything. As a final reminder, integrate it into a phrase that will accompany you from now on, because it defines your new place in the world and in your own soul. I am the boundary that teaches how to truly love.